Well, good morning, everyone. It's great to be back. Thanks for having me. The vast majority of you wouldn't have had a choice in that. It was all Brett. Well, actually, no. Let's blame Jason today. You get that some days, don't you, Jason? I'm thankful that I've had the opportunity to be here a few times and that I am back from Ukraine. And as I'll share shortly, I very well could not have been. And so this morning I want to take this sermon a little bit shorter than I planned just because it's hot, and you have the privilege of being a preacher where you can go as long as you want in some churches and they won't call you back. No. And you can shorten it too sometimes. So I plan to do that this morning for you. So be assured we won't be here more than a couple of hours. No, just kidding. Very shortly, I'll share on the trip to Ukraine and give you all a little bit of an update on the ministry. But after that, I will approach Psalm 73 and this question of, well, where is God in our suffering, in two ways, sort of two directions. Firstly, it will be, well, what is God's responsibility in suffering? What has God promised that he will do? How's he promised he's going to fix it? And secondly, what is our responsibility? What does God call us to do in suffering? Because really in the Bible there's three forms of justice. There's divine justice, that is only what God can do, what he can bring about in the restoration of all things. Secondly, there's forensic justice, that is, well, what theologians and funky language people talk about the cross of Jesus Christ, that he was the one who received the judgment of God so that we are set free. So essentially we receive the salvation of Christ. So God's justice was dealt with through Christ. And thirdly, there's social justice. That's our responsibility as God's people to bring the reign of God to the world and to help God reverse evil and be, as Jesus said, like salt and light and yeast, right? What does salt do? Now, some of you, I know because I have Pastor Peter and Ray here, that we grew up in Indonesia together. Well, I actually grew up with their kids. They were a bit older than me. But in Indonesia, there was a time, you may remember, that there were no fridges. Is that right? Yeah. And who remembers a time without a fridge? Oh, only a couple of people. Well, most of you younger people, even Brett, do you remember a time? Well, I do, because I actually lived in Indo, man. You know, and I remember when my mum would have to, use salt to preserve meat. And so salt doesn't only preserve, but it actually can reverse decay. Did you know that? That's why Jesus said, we're salt. We can help preserve stuff around us. Anyway, we'll get into salt again in a minute, but I want to show you this first video, if we can have it played, because this is what happened about 2 streets away from me on the 4th of September this year. So it's only a pretty short video, but as you can see, it looks like there's a rocket attack. Could people read the text? So this happened in Lviv, and I was awoken by this massive sound at 4:50 a.m, and I didn't really know what it was at first because it just sounded like someone dropped a massive drum that kind of exploded, but it was in a distance, and I couldn't really explain it. But within seconds of this sound, my windows were shaking like they were going to shatter. There was some sort of aftershock, and I didn't hear any air raid sirens, so I didn't think it was a bomb attack. But apparently what had happened is the Russians had first sent a rocket into the power grid to take out the power, and without power to the city, well, the large alarms don't actually work. Now, you might think, well, that's a bit odd, why don't they have a backup? Well, this is like pretty ancient infrastructure. You know, if you've seen movies about the Cold War, right, and all those old buildings and old electricity plants with stuff sparking and there's like really no workplace health and safety, you've seen those? Well, it's kind of like that still in parts of Ukraine. So, you know, there's no backup system, and so they sent a rocket into the power grid, and a couple of minutes later they'd sent another one into this city block, and the rocket had actually gone over the hotel that I was staying in, literally, and landed in this street and residential block and killed several people. Sadly, a man's wife and 3 daughters were killed. He was the only survivor, and a number of other people were injured. And I didn't find this out till later on, but my coordinator in Ukraine, she calls me right as my windows are shaking and says, get your clothes on, get out of bed and get down to the bunker as soon as you can, because there's a bunker under the hotel, which she'd previously shown me in case I need to run there. And so I'm getting my clothes on and running down there. I get in the hallway, and the hallway is just cram-packed with people. I couldn't even see the stairways. Like every man is dog. When I say that, I mean it literally, because in Ukraine you can take your dogs and your cats and even your birds into your hotel room. So no workplace health and safety at all. If there's any people watching from Ukraine leadership, I don't mean any offence, but it's just, yeah, that's the way it was. This is going online, isn't it? Yeah, okay. Yeah, no worries. Yeah, it's possible. Anything's possible. And so, yeah, within seconds, I'm just, you know, not really knowing what to do because I can't get down there, and, you know, I had parrots flying around me, and I did, honestly. And then anyway, like, I'm pushing through the crowd trying to go, like, should I just wait or should I try and be the first? You know, like, when you're panicking, you don't know what to do, right? Am I going to sacrifice myself and wait at the back of the line, or am I going to push in? And I just like, well, I'm just going to let the Lord, because I didn't know if there was going to be another one, right? You don't know. And so, yeah, it was a bit of an interesting experience. And so, thankfully, I was able to call Alison because she's 7 hours ahead, so it was late afternoon. My poor wife, 'cause I didn't want to call her. I thought, look, you know, I'll just let her know when I'm okay, if I will be okay. I thought, well, should I call her and tell her what's going on? And anyway, I didn't know how much that would actually make things worse. But anyway, I called her, and, you know, she prayed with me, and she asked our intercessors to pray. And my poor wife, you know, because this was like the second day I was in Ukraine. I was planning to be there for 10. So this is one of the most intense rocket attacks that we'd actually ever had from Russia on Ukraine. And so what they do is they send a rocket, take out the power grid. They send a second one to take out where they are targeting. And then they'll send a third one to take out the emergency personnel who've come to the rescue of those who've been hit by the second. So, you know, all for Russia saying, oh, we don't target civilians. That's actually not correct. But I'm sure that you all knew that that wasn't right. So as we, you know, came out of the hotel and just got back up into my room, I get a call again from my coordinator, because she's down the bottom. She's already down there in the bunker. She just, yeah, the little maps we have on our phone, you know, little apps that the government tells us where all the rockets are. I'm like, yeah, you can rely on that. She said, oh, there's no more rockets that we know of. You can go back to your room and try and get some sleep before our training at 9. I'm like, okay, I'll just try and get some sleep. So as we had breakfast, very sombre, down in the restaurant, which is just kind of a little bit above where the bunker is, I got a call from the pastor who was hosting my trauma training for the morning, and he said, just letting you know, we are having training. So I thought they'd cancel it, but this is another day in Ukraine. So we ended up having to walk through the affected area because there was so much of a blast radius, even into the street adjacent to mine, where I was staying, that we had to walk through the affected area, and they were still taking people out in body bags. And yeah, that was quite confronting. And I was like, yeah, I'd experienced something similar in Ukraine, just I wasn't there. But that kind of feeling of, hey, it could have been you. Why wasn't it me? Why were other people killed, but that could have been me? That kind of gets you. It's really hard to explain, but it's not the first time that I've dodged a rocket. Not that I intentionally dodged this one either, but when we began the ministry in Sri Lanka in 2019, I'd just been doing some research on trauma recovery in St. Sebastian's Church, which is a Catholic church in Colombo, Sri Lanka, less than a week after I'd left Sri Lanka to come back to Australia. That same church was actually bombed to smithereens by a suicide bomber, and 86 people were killed. So I've dodged a bomb twice, and my friends have a new name for me. Know what it is? Rocket Man. I thought you need to actually be having 3 dodges, or at least that, to be qualified for a nickname, but there you go. Maybe I'll get a 3, maybe third time I won't, but I don't know if you know the song. If it's okay, the pastor's not here, so can I quote a line from an Elton John song? You know the song Rocket Man? I think it's going to be a long, long time till touchdown brings me again to find. You know that one, that line? Only Brett knows the song. That's okay. But not everyone will nod with me, because that doesn't mean they don't all disagree with me, right? That's okay. I think it's going to be a long, long time till touchdown brings me again to find. I say to Alison that I don't think it's going to be a long, long time till touchdown brings me again to find in some of these places where we go that there'll be another rocket attack of some sort, because this is what we do. We take trauma recovery and the gospel to the hardest places in the world, and we have a joy to do that. Now, I don't know if some of you, all of you know, the first person out of our team to go to Ukraine was Alison. She was the one that set up our project. She went there basically like not more than about 4 or 5 months after Russia had pulled out of their major attack on Kiev. And this came as a real surprise to me, because Alison's a very quiet, humble person and non-assuming, and wasn't really ever, she was always worried about me going to these places. And one day, out of the blue, quite uncharacteristically, Alison says, I think the Lord wants us to do a project in Ukraine. And I'm like, I don't think so. It's not, I haven't felt that. And she said, no, I feel strongly about it. She said, I feel so strongly about it, I'm going to go. I'm like, what? Huh? What? This is my wife? My quiet, subdued wife who wouldn't... No, I'm thinking, okay, if she says that, I'm sure the Holy Spirit's in it, right? And so she starts planning a trip, and then she says to me one day, I really want to answer this question that we constantly get asked in our ministry, especially by our new Ukrainian friends. What is God up to in suffering? Why does God allow suffering and evil in our world? And even Christians are asking this more and more, right? And the more that you face suffering and evil where there seems to be no solution, you're more likely to ask it and struggle with this question. Who struggles with this question? What is God up to? Only Brett. No, you're the only one here. But Am I right? We all struggle with this question. Even though we know the answers, we still struggle with why God, a good God, would allow evil, especially to innocent people. Why would God, or those who we would consider to be innocent? And so Alison said to me, I don't do the preaching stuff like you can. Actually, she could. She'd do a pretty good job of it, by the way. She's pretty good. But I don't really know how to write the theology, but Psalm 56:8 really grabs me. You know the passage where it talks about God taking all our tears and putting them in his bottle? Know that one? You can't put your hand up. Someone else. And she said, well, I feel led to write a poem about it. And so some of you maybe have copies of this poem, but this poem's kind of gone all over the world now. And everywhere I go in Ukraine, because we had it translated into Ukrainian with an art piece that Alison did, everywhere I go in Ukraine, people have got it up somewhere. And it's really exciting too. And I want to read it to you. And if you have not got a copy of this poem, I encourage you to go and get one on our website or ask Alison. So this is one of Alison's poems. Imagine for a moment if every tear you cried didn't just roll down your cheek and quietly subside. What if every tear was saved from every time you wept, then sent from here to heaven and in a bottle kept? Imagine a heavenly garden that is watered by those tears, where God is the tender gardener in each season through the years. With every tear he plants a seed, and soon a garden grows, for whether shed in pain or joy, the Father truly knows. I ask you to imagine, but this isn't make-believe, beauty can come from ashes if you're willing to receive. If you don't have a copy of that poem, I encourage you to go and get one, because every sale of the poem goes to help people at the moment in Ukraine. As we head towards, or we're in Advent now, as we head towards Christmas and we consider the wonder and the joy of Jesus' arrival, I'm sure that many of us are wondering, well, as we reflect on Christ's coming into the world, we're of course reflecting and hoping for his second return, probably now more than ever, right? With all the suffering, all the evil, all the sin, all the brokenness, all the wars, more and more we're saying, Lord, how long, how long, how long? And we should be, because that's scriptural, to lament and to keep pleading with God and saying, Lord, you know, we can't fix this, though we try. Only you can fix this evil world. Only you can bring a miraculous resolution to this. Only you can cause those who do evil to repent and to lay down their arms at your feet. Only you can bring about this recovery of this world from evil. And so Psalm 73 is a beautiful psalm. I want to unpack this a little bit for you this morning. It was written by Asaph, who was one of King David's chief worship leaders. And he wrote a couple of psalms, but this is one of the most powerful in the Bible, I believe. And I don't know how many times you've read it or if you've studied it, but it's really quite fascinating because we don't really know the history of what's going on. What is the crisis in Israel? Is it just general world domination of, unspeakably powerful people? Is it the Moabites? Is it the Canaanites? What's happening here? Is Israel being oppressed? We don't really have a clear background to when it was written specifically, but what we do know is that Asaph is lamenting the fact that evil people keep getting away with evil, and it doesn't seem like God's doing anything about it. And so he laments to God, he weeps, he cries out to God, God, why is it that you, the King of the universe, the one enthroned in the heavens, isn't doing anything about the suffering of God's people? To the point where he almost is kind of like saying, As God's people, we see the suffering of the world and you do nothing about it, God. So it's almost like, why don't we just join them? It's just becoming too hard. Let's just join the evil people and become wealthy and prosperous like them, because evil people keep getting away with evil and they get richer, and God's people who are faithful get poorer and get more persecuted. That's basically what he's lamenting. And he goes on and on. But then something interesting happens. The psalm shifts, because he goes into the temple and there's a new story that unfolds. Let's have a look at this again. The evil scoff and speak with malice. With arrogance they threaten oppression. Their mouths lay claim to heaven, and their tongues take possession of the earth. That's a strong statement, isn't it? Their tongues take possession of the earth. In other words, all they need to do is speak, and the world is consumed by power, by evil, by armies. Therefore their people turn to them and drink up waters in abundance. They say, how could God know? God, who is he? Like, I'm God. Does not the Most High know anything? This is what they are like, always free of care. They go on amassing wealth. All day long I've been afflicted, and every morning brings new punishments. We don't know if he is himself just being emotionally and mentally afflicted by what he's seeing, or there's some suffering he's also endured as a result of unspeakable power of the world and evil people. Every morning, new punishments. Then he says, when I tried to understand this, verse 18, it troubled me deeply till I entered the sanctuary of God, and then I understood their final destiny. It is only when Asaph enters the temple that he sees a different picture. He goes into the place where heaven and earth meet, where God would come down and God would speak with his people. And he sees a totally different picture emerge. Some scholars believe that what's happening here is that Asaph goes into the temple and he lays before God, and the Holy Spirit gives him a dream of heaven where he's in heaven and he's looking back. And he's looking back so far that he's seeing the final resolution of God, and that God has come and he's judged the earth. He's judged the living and the dead. And the evil people who were once the ones who brought terror are now themselves hiding in terror at the great and glorious day of the Lord. What a day that will be. And he's starting to find a fresh vision, a fresh renewal of his hope and understanding of how to respond to evil and suffering, because he can see the final solution for evil people, that they're not always going to get away with it. Surely you place them on slippery ground, verse 18. You cast them down to ruin. How suddenly are they destroyed, completely swept away by terrors, the very ones who bring terror. The very powers of Putin and, some would say Israel, but, whatever. I mean, all the powers of the world that are creating evil. I mean, obviously Israel's defending themselves, and a lot of people are dying as a result. The ones who are causing terror will very soon be cowering in terror. I mean, that gives us some hope, doesn't it? It gives me a lot of hope. Just a reminder, as my dad once said to me, most preaching isn't telling people anything new. It's actually reminding us what we often forget, right? About the promises of God and the beauty and the wonder. That's what most preaching does. This is reminding us of stuff we often forget. Because, the thing that I learned as a trauma counsellor is, this is the thing with human beings, all of us. We have this tendency to remember the things that we shouldn't and forget the things we should, right? And this is just all about bringing back the memory of what God is up to and that God's final solution is on its way. Verse 21, when my heart was grieved and my spirit embittered, I was senseless and ignorant, I was a brute beast before you. He's saying, Lord, I'm sorry because I was acting like an animal. I was thinking like an animal. What he's really saying is that when God's people fail to live in hope and embody hope, we're no more than beasts of the earth, because the beasts don't have hope, do they? Like, animals don't have any capacity to understand any of this. Yet I'm always with you. This is the section most of us remember, verse 23. Yet I'm always with you. You hold me by my right hand. You guide me with your counsel, and afterwards you'll take me into glory. Whom have I in heaven but you? And earth has nothing besides you that I desire. My flesh and my heart may fail, but God is the strength of my heart, my portion forever. So this is the first part of the sermon. The second part's going to be shorter. So I better not walk around like a Pentecostal or you won't hear me. I can stay in one spot, by the way. My wife tested me once because I like to walk around, and she said, I'm going to count how long you can stay in one spot. And so it was quite a good... your wife's a great... accountability partner. I know mine is anyway. But this is it. The second part of the sermon is going to be a little bit shorter. So we've looked at what's God's solution. This is what God is going to do. Now the second part of the sermon is actually, well, what are we going to do? What has God called us to do? Because you know what's so beautiful that Asaph and none of the Old Testament saints would have comprehended is that once upon a time you would have to go into the temple to meet with God, unless you were really, really, really special and then God met you at a burning bush like Moses. That'd be a bit tough, wouldn't it? But there was a time where the only place you could meet with God was in the temple. Well, guess where the temple is now? The temple of God is in you and me. You and me, we are the places where heaven and earth has already met. I mean, this is a beauty and a wonder of the presence and the revelation of God that the Old Testament saints, it says in Hebrews, were looking out for and testing the signs and the wonders to find out when it was going to happen, but it's already happened. And this Christmas, we're remembering how this all began. So the question is, as the temples of the Holy Spirit, as God's living, breathing, walking places where heaven and earth has met, what is your response to suffering? What is my response? What has God called us to do this Christmas to alleviate the pain and evil in the world? Well, there's many things that we can do. Can someone tell me one thing that we can do to reverse evil in the world today as God's people, as His temples, as His living, breathing presence in the world? Can someone tell me one thing we can do? Pray. I've got a story about prayer in a minute. Yes, another one. What apart from prayer? Speak up? Yeah, be voices against evil. What do they say that Bonhoeffer once says is that, the silence when there is evil is probably a greater evil than the evil itself, because we can speak. Okay, so who's next? What's someone else? What else can we do to reverse evil and suffering in the world? What's God called us to do? Our responsibility. Someone else. Love and encourage. You know what I've learnt, and I kind of knew this when I studied, the science of counselling, but When people are in their darkest moment, even Christians, they're going through their desert of despair. You can tell them the theological answers. You can give them Psalm 23, but they're often so emotionally and mentally distraught that it's like water off a duck's back. They don't actually really, they only comprehend it intellectually. It doesn't move 6 inches from the head to the heart. You know what they want the most? They want you to sit and listen. Because people cannot be healed from what they can't reveal. You know, people need to talk. And it might take a long time. But to sit and listen, or not provide a solution even. You know, I think that all people need that sometimes, maybe more often than we think. Just someone listening, sitting with them, being like Job's mates. Right? Being like Job's mates. Well, the good part of Job's mates, right? You knew I was going to get to that. But just listen and, you know. Okay, what's something else? I'm trying to dig here for some more enfleshed, human, Christian, salt light stuff. Help people out. Help people out. You know, Aussie people are really not as resistant to the gospel as you might think, but Aussies have done some research on how Aussies respond to the gospel. And because the church has very little credibility, the Christian message itself doesn't have a lot of credibility. I'm not saying the gospel, I'm saying Christianity and generally our jargon doesn't have much credibility. But Aussies love to have their mates help them. And they love to have help, and that really opens their hearts to the gospel. The question I often ask people is this. If you left your home now, you might have lived there for 20, 30 years, 40. Often farming folks live longer than city folks in places. If you left and just packed up and moved, would your neighbours grieve? Would your neighbours grieve? Or would they be like, oh, those Christians, I'm glad they're gone? You know, I've heard people say that to me before about believers who've lived in certain places for decades, neighbours. There's one place we lived at some years ago, and I told our new neighbour that I was a believer. It sounded like a bad idea. He said, oh yeah, one of those Christians. We had a neighbour, he was about 30 years ago. All we could hear them doing was singing. I thought, oh, it wasn't too bad, but he said that was about it. Never came over, never did anything, sometimes waved. We had a massive flood going through here. No, he said, like, didn't do anything. So, salt and light, yeast. We can pray, but you know, I have a story. So we have a big intercessory prayer network around the world, as you might know, and one of our intercessor friends from India told me a fascinating story. She said, within our region there was this people group who were very, very opposed to the gospel, very dark, been kept in darkness by Satan for 2,000 years. And whenever missionaries went there, they were either killed or sent away fleeing because of their resistance towards the gospel. They absolutely hated anybody sharing Jesus anywhere near them. And she said, so we prayed as a family for 28 years. My parents, my grandparents before me, we prayed that God would bring a breakthrough, a spiritual breakthrough, that the light would break into the darkness and capture their hearts. And there came a day where we knew in the spirit that that darkness over that people group was broken. And she said, and we started telling the missionaries that had been there, that they're open. They said, how do you know? Well, we know in the spirit because we're intercessors, we know. They're afraid to go. And they even contacted the American missionaries who originally went there and fled for their lives back to America. And even the American missionaries, who are now pretty old, were like, no, we're not going to go. It's too dangerous. And so nobody would go. And so Hannah said to me that about a year and a half later, after we knew that this demonic power had been broken through prayer, she said, one of the elders of this people group contacted some of us and said, we're welcoming Christians. We want to hear about the gospel. We've been searching out, but people are afraid. You know, come, send people. But people still wouldn't go. And I said, well, what happened then? And she said, well, after another 12 months, the cloak of darkness and evil returned. And they returned to their old practices, because nobody would go. The question, are we willing to only pray, or are we willing to go? And I ask myself this question a lot. Am I willing to go to somewhere where I could lose my life? Well, I've been to plenty of places where I almost lost my life, and I'm still here. But next time, I may not return. And I've prepared my wife and kids for that. And that's okay, because I'm where I need to be. And I'm not asking all of you to do that. I'm not saying that I'm anybody special. I'm not. In fact, there's something wonderful about being in a place of danger for the gospel. You know, when Jesus says in the Great Commission, I'll be with you always to the ends of the earth, there's a low and with that is incredibly more powerful and more present when you happen to risk something for the kingdom of God. So I'd encourage you to risk your life for the kingdom, just to sense the presence of God with you in that place. Because for probably the first day, my heart was beating a little bit faster when I was in Ukraine after that rocket attack. But then I had this incredible joy. Really, it's joy unspeakable. I didn't know how I got it, why I got it. I just didn't have any fear. And on about the fourth day, we actually saw some drones. So I asked the taxi driver, what's going on with these drones? Are they Russian drones? He said, yeah, they're Russian drones. It's driving along. Oh, okay, they're Russian drones. I said, are they the kamikaze ones or the surveillance ones? He said, oh, you don't know. And I said, well, are we safe? And he said, no. He said, what are you even doing here anyway from Australia? You know, 14,800 kilometres. He said, this is a dangerous place. What are you doing here? Anyway, I had the opportunity to share the gospel with him. It's the first time he'd ever heard it. And so who knows what God's going to do in his heart. But my point is that are we willing to only pray, or are we willing to go? And I hope Hannah's story challenged the fact that we need both people to go in prayer and people to go in flesh, because you and I, we are the place where heaven and earth has met. We are the ones that the Lord's called to work with him to bring the world back into order. We are the solution to the suffering of the world, you and me. Yes, God can ultimately, and is the only one that will ultimately bring things into order, bring justice to evil people. But he's also called you and I to help him in that process. Amen? How far are we willing to go to do that? I challenge you this Christmas to make a list of some of the people, as you pray, that the Lord puts on your heart that I should go and see. Not just other believers, non-believers. And if you don't know any non-believers, I challenge you to pray about that. Because here's some sad facts, and this is what I'm going to leave you with. The stats would be about similar in Australia. Someone connected with the Barna Group in the US did some research a number of years ago. And the research about how present and connected American Christians are with non-believers is staggering. And in Australia it would be very similar. He said that the research says that 90% of Americans born in the church, raised in the church, married in the church, baptised in the church, buried in the church, 90% will never share Jesus with another person. And I would say that probably for Australia the statistics would be similar. So when you do your list and ask the Lord to show you, who can I bless this Advent? Who can I spend some time with and share with them the wonder and the joy that the coming of Jesus is a wonderful thing. But the second coming of Jesus can even be more wonderful. Are you ready for that? Well, thank you, guys. God bless you, and thank you again for all the love and support that you give Alison and I and our family. And if you'd like to come and grab a brochure, help us raise our end-of-year financial appeal for Ukraine. We've got 4 big projects there now. Just before I close, can we have Yulia's video? Is that all good to go? So Yulia's a beautiful young lady. Oh, actually, she's about 29. Pretty young. It's not young when you're 52. Hey, Brett. No. And she is the founder of 2 incredible projects, and she fled Kharkiv, one of the frontline cities, with her husband, almost, lost her life. But between then and now, only about 2 years, she set up 2 projects. One is a project to help disabled children who've fled with their parents from the front line of the war. The second one is for women, and we're actually supporting her and her ministry through our work and working with her. She's actually deploying our trauma recovery and reconciliation resources as well. So we'll have a listen to Julia and we'll hand it over to Brett. Thanks, everyone. God bless you.
My name is Yulia and I'm from Kharkiv. For many years, our team has been supporting children and families who found themselves in difficult life circumstances. Every day we have strived to bring back hope to those who lost it. On February 24, I woke up to the sound of explosion in my hometown. It was one of the scariest moments of my life, and unfortunately it continues to this day. My family had to leave home in search of safety. Our team is spread across different parts of Ukraine and even beyond. But despite the distance, we keep working together with one shared goal: to bring hope and share Christ's message. Today we see that the most vulnerable are women and children who have become internally displaced persons. They have lost everything: their home, jobs, and for some, even loved ones. For them, we launched the Strong Women Project, a program that helps women rediscover themselves, build new support networks, receive psychological assistance, and find employment. But most importantly, it brings them closer to Christ. And we also created a Heroes Club for children with disabilities and their families. Sadly, in our country, these families receive extremely small support, around $150 per month, which doesn't even begin to cover their basic needs in caring for these children. But thanks to the Heroes Club, they have the opportunity to come to us, play, socialize, and showcase their talents. You should see their faces when they feel joy and attention. Project 114 is dedicated to transforming lives through Christ's healing, offering support and helping to overcome trauma. Our programs are focused on supporting women, mothers, and children, helping them regain strength and find hope in time of despair. We believe that together we can turn trauma into triumph and give these women and children a chance to thrive through Christ. Your support helps rebuild lives, foster spiritual growth, and brings hope to those who need it most. I'm endlessly grateful to everyone who supports us during these challenging times. I believe that God will bless you, as it's written in Proverbs 19:70. Whoever is kind to the poor, lend to the Lord, and He will reward them for what they have done. Thank you. Thank you for everyone. Bless you from Ukraine.